everyone, and welcome to another STP webinar. Today we have a real treat for you. One of our favorite speakers and industry leaders, Michael Hackett, Senior VP and one of the founders of LogiGear Corporation. Michael will provide his insights regarding what lean software development means for testers. Before we get started, just a couple of announcements. We are very excited about our upcoming STPCon Fall Conference this September 23rd through the 26th on the Boston Harbor. Michael will actually be there delivering a workshop on modern test plans and two sessions, one on Agile, Lean, and DevOps, and the other on regression automation challenges for CI/CD. We are looking forward to those and know that the attendees will enjoy them as well. You can learn more about these workshops and sessions on stpcon.com, as well as the full schedule. So just kind of check that out. We've only a week away, so make sure you make your plans pretty quickly. Another quick announcement, our next webinar is the 9th of October right here on the STP community. Buy versus build, 5 things to consider when implementing a mobile device cloud. Steve Orlando with Mobile Labs will answer some important questions about taking on this task. You can register for this and any of the other posted community webinars at softwaretestpro.com/training. Well, if you're listening today and feel compelled to tweet a key learning point, please do so with hashtag STPwebinar. And don't forget to tag LogiGear and Software Test Pro. We greatly appreciate that. Well, let's get started. I'm going to let Michael introduce himself. He will do a much better job than I will. But I wanted to thank you again for joining us today. And Michael, take it away.
So my name is Michael Hackett, and I'm one of the founders of LogiGear. We do software testing services. We have an automation tool called Test Architect, and we publish a magazine, LogiGear Magazine. We have an automation issue coming out in the next 2 weeks, and that's what we do. So I want to talk about lean software development today, but mainly focus on how lean impacts software testing. So what I want to do today is just give a little overview of lean, but then to try and get a bigger, deeper understanding of lean. I think most people have a little bit of an idea of lean meaning cut fat, lean manufacturing processes, but just how much lean software development has invaded software development today. And I want to focus that particularly on software testing and how it's impacted software testing. And then later on, after we have a bigger understanding, look at some first steps, how you can start being more lean in your software testing practice, or if you are doing lean, some things that you should be doing. And then, of course, questions and answers if we have time at the end. So I'd like to say that lean has taken over software development. Most people will say they're agile or they're doing Scrum or they're moving toward DevOps, but lean and lean principles has really powered this drive to faster, more efficient development, whether it is just-in-time decisions. Everybody's making just-in-time decisions using Kanban boards or Scrum boards, sprint boards or Kanban boards. Faster flow of smaller releases. The whole idea of DevOps, continuous delivery, is really small releases. In Lean, they call that the WIP, the work in progress, managing a small amount in a work in progress. And at least in Silicon Valley, everybody's has read Lean Startup. You can see copies of the book Lean Startup on people's desks that gave us this idea of MVP, minimum viable product. We're not going to get too deep into what is minimum marketable product or minimum releasable product, but that idea of minimum viable product, I hear that at so many companies today. People are using that lean idea of let's just get the minimum of the product out to the customer to get feedback. That's the direct lean principle. And so much of DevOps and continuous delivery and CI is taken from Lean. So I think it's going to benefit us all if we get deeper into what is Lean. So there we go. Where Agile created this tidal wave of faster development today, Lean is really what's feeding it today. And Lean are the practices that people are really powering, getting more efficient and getting smaller today. So let's get into it. So Lean comes from this Toyota production system. I think most people know that. Lean was first called Lean in 1988, but these practices and the methods were first used in the 1940s in car manufacturing. How to increase throughput on production line development of cars, but more focused on quality from the start, more focused on better quality cars, less defects. Six Sigma comes out of Lean and measuring and managing defects. So I think we've heard all of those things about cars, but Lean really jumped into software with this publishing in 2003 of the Lean Software Development, the Agile Toolkit by Mary Poppendieck and Tom Poppendieck, who are really the godparents of Lean in software these days. They're great speakers and have really done pioneering work in bringing Lean into software. So we're going to spend a few minutes now talking about what is Lean. Lean, I think, as most people know, is cutting fat, cutting extra, cutting waste. There's a couple of different definitions of Lean, but the one that that we use in Lean manufacturing and in Lean software development is just cut waste. If all you get out of a better understanding of Lean is cut waste, you're in good shape. So the principles, we're going to spend a few minutes on this, just trying to understand at a higher level what are the 7 Lean principles. So I just said eliminate waste, and we're going to spend a while today talking about what is waste. One way we could look at waste is, for example, if I use this idea that in the old days, we might do an architecture document and we might do a design document and then write technical specs and then write a requirements document, and all these things get reviewed and signed off and handed off. And we have all these giant documents. So I could start a project and write the team could write a design doc. And then 2 months later, when we're actually designing the software, when somebody is sitting down to code the software, they have to change the design. They can't do it this way, or there's a third-party component that's different, or because now that we're actually implementing the design, something has to change. So writing those big documents up front is considered a waste these days. So big documentation is a waste. When is the best time, if we're going to design a feature, when is the best time to design it? Just in time as we're writing the code. So this idea that waste is, you have to eliminate waste, because already before we've even written any code in that example, we've got maintenance, we've got to go. We're probably not going to update the documents. We're probably just going to change a design, and that chunk of the process is a waste. So we know when people started being Agile, one of the first things to go was all of this documentation that I mentioned earlier, like architecture documents and technical specs and even test plans, out the window, because it's just waste. Trust me, we'll be talking about what we're going to do with test plans and things like that over the course of the next hour. But just that idea that waste is handoff and a lot of pre-planning. And one of the goals of Lean is to look for waste, to find waste in your value stream, in your development process to cut. So next, I want to skip to just-in-time. I brought up this idea of just-in-time, decide as late as possible. To use a different example than that design idea is, even if we were planning on testing something. So I get these requirements or these user stories that we're going to design a feature a certain way, and then I actually get the feature, but I've already designed a bunch of test cases. When I get the feature and it's time to test it, the feature isn't built the way that we thought it was going to be built. So all of those test cases that I wrote now have to be maintained, and there's a maintenance cost there, and I haven't even run the test yet. So the best time to design the test cases in terms of Lean principles is just in time. Next, deliver as fast as possible. deliver as fast as possible, the main meaning of that is get it to the customer as fast as you can. So getting it to the customer as fast as you can. Why? To get immediate feedback. You want to make sure that you are building the right feature, that they're going to use it, that they like it, that it's going to fit in their workflow, that it's something that they're going to pay for. So this idea of getting a minimum viable product, getting it out to the customers as fast as you can to get immediate feedback. The real goal of deliver as fast as possible is not to make more money, it's to get immediate feedback, find out if this is what's going to satisfy the need of the customer. Next one I want to talk about is quality at every step. Quality at every step, that idea that quality begins at the beginning. Quality starts with user stories. Quality starts with in good environments. Quality at every step is not only quality code, but quality unit tests. The idea that quality happens at the end is out the window. It's gone. Or that there's a specific quality team, like a team of testers, and they are the only people responsible for quality, is gone. That's an old idea that if your company still does that, that is the first place that we need to shake the cage on culture. That quality starts with good user stories. So the product owner, the people who write the user stories, are the first step in quality. It doesn't happen at the end, and it's not something you can test in at the end. The idea that you can do a bunch of testing at the end of a release cycle and hope to have a quality product is wrong and old, and we need to get rid of that idea if your company is still hanging on to that one. So there's three that I didn't talk about that I want to talk about together: amplify learning, empower the team, and see the whole. And to me, those three things go together. Amplify learning is not only take a class and learn something. When I talk about learning and I talk about lean, learning is as much finding bugs. Finding bugs is learning about the application and how the application is going to work. Amplify learning is learning about the customers, learning about use cases. One of the common things I hear at different companies is that what are called bugs, what winds up being a support call or a bug, happens, and it's going to cause some patch or some even e-release, is an issue happens because the development team didn't even know the customers did that thing, or they didn't fully understand the customer's workflow. So the product that they sent out there has this function or has part of this workflow that isn't what customers do. So amplifying learning is understanding more about the customer, understanding more about what the customer workflows are, the customer environments. It's also learning more about how the product works, finding bugs. So amplify learning is not really taking a class. It's just anything that you can learning about how learning about how to write better user stories, learning about how to test better. Amplify learning. Learning is a goal. Learning is one of the main goals of lean. One of the reasons why just in time is this foundation issue in lean is that as you go into the process, you learn more about it. When I brought up this idea of you don't want to do a big upfront design, and then when you actually start writing the code, you have to change the design already, that there's a maintenance cost there, is bit by bit, step by step, as you're getting the user stories, as you start doing an architecture, you're going to learn more about the design. You're learning the whole way through the user story and architecture process, so that when you get to designing, you've already learned. You've amplified. Learning has been amplified enough that your design is going to be more effective. So amplify learning is learning about the customer, learning about the product, learning about the environments, learning about other skill sets. Learning is a high priority. And empower the team. If I say to this specific team, you team, go ahead and do this design. We're going to empower you to do this design. To do that, you need to learn you need to know how do the other pieces of this puzzle fit together? How is my feature going to work together with these other features? How is if my feature changes some parameter that winds up getting passed over to some other part of our platform or ecosystem, I have to know how that other part of the ecosystem works, that when you empower me to make this design decision, I'm not going to break that other feature. So amplify learning and empower the team go together, as does see the whole. I have to be able to see the whole picture like environments, the customers, production, see the whole like learning about other parts of the system, not only focused in a narrow way on my part of the system, but seeing the whole entire system. So amplify learning, empower the team, and see the whole go together. All right, so that's a big understanding of what the 7 lean principles are, and I want to jump into a couple of them to spend more time drilling down further. First, I want to talk about these words that we use. So on this next slide, I have a whole bunch of text, and the whole reason for this is when we talk about the 7 principles, I used the 7 lean principles from Wikipedia because they're the most commonly out there. People could use words like enhance learning or create knowledge. I said amplify learning. People use different words. It's not like if you say reduce friction or eliminate waste, that one is lean and one is not. It's the ideas that are important. Don't get hung up on the words. So where people own this idea, where people own lean, Agile, right? Agile and the Agile Manifesto and the Agile principles, and people own Scrum, like the Scrum Guide, and there are specific things. Lean is a lot more loose, and when we're taking these ideas from lean manufacturing and putting them into lean software development, people look at them different ways. So we're going to spend a while looking at these different ways. Eliminate waste. So we're going to go further into looking at eliminating waste. Eliminate waste is cut what's not needed. I mentioned test plans. I'm doing a session at the upcoming fall STP show in Boston on test plans and modern test plans, because this idea that somebody is going to sit down before the project starts and write a big test plan document has to go. And a lot of teams have political issues with test plans. They can cause political problems. They take a lot of time. And when you actually get into the testing project, things may not go as planned. So how important was it to write a big test plan? Cut what's not needed. Stay focused only on what you're delivering to the customer. Stay focused only on what you need. Do the essential, no extra. One of the other sessions I'm going to talk about is regression testing in this STP show in the fall. Many companies, their goals were to build these very large automated regression suites. And that was the goal: automate everything and build these big regression suites. And the bigger the regression suites are, the better. Automate more and automate more and automate more. Well, the problem is, if you want to do continuous delivery and you have an automated regression suite, I have this one customer who did really a great job at automate everything, and it takes them 6 days to run this automated suite of hundreds of thousands of tests. And now that they're trying to do continuous delivery, that 6-day running automated suite is too big. It doesn't give them good feedback. It doesn't give them immediate feedback. It has a giant maintenance cost. It's its own software development project that is it's got a lot, and at this point it's got a lot of waste. It took them 10 years of automating Selenium tests to get to those couple of 100,000 of tests, and they're now looking at their regression suite as a big waste. So under this lean idea, that it takes so long to run the regression suite is a waste, and not every test is needed these days. If they automated a bunch of tests 9 years ago, how important are those tests that they did 9 years ago on the same product line? Those features are still out there. This is a difficult conversation that company is having right now of how they automated hundreds of tests, 10 years ago, and then thousands of tests over time to build this giant automated suite that was a really important goal of the test team, was to automate so much. Well, there's now a lot of waste, and it's a very difficult thing to go back and remove a bunch of automated tests. There's risk involved there. It is political, it's emotional, it's financial, but it's causing a bunch of problems, and this regression suite is now looked at as being a waste. So lean is difficult. Lean is if the more you get into lean and adopting these lean practices is going to bring up some hard choices for you. So on this next slide, I have a whole bunch of ideas on what waste is, and they're referenced down at the bottom. Some come from the Poppendicks, who wrote the lean software book. Some come from the Toyota production system itself, of how they define lean, and some are just some random lists of waste I found concerning software, like bugs. Defects is a waste, right? It's if a defect is found, it means that somebody's going to have to go back and rewrite code to make it work better. Then we're going to have to go and retest, and then we're going to have to go and redeploy. So defects is considered a waste. Relearning. Handoffs. Handoffs is a big no-no. I used to say handoffs is a dirty word in Agile, right? When teams were siloed and would hand work off to another team, handoff was a dirty word. In the lean world, handoff is a really dirty word. When you hand off something, there's relearning and maybe some maintenance and some task switching or multitasking that's going to go on, and those are considered waste. So I'm not going to read through this whole giant list, but one of the goals, these slides are going to be available, and like Jimmy said, the webinar is recorded. You can download it later. One of the goals of me having a giant list like this of what waste is for you to go into your value stream, into your software development mechanism, and look for waste and look for places that you can cut waste to make it more efficient. So look for waste and cut waste. At the same time, remember that testing is normally somewhat a redundant process. So I could have some product I'm going to test, and I run a test and I get some result, passes or fails, whatever. When we move that to another environment, I'm going to run that same test. Or I could take that same test and change a piece of data and run that same test using a different piece of data. I could have a dummy, I could have a mocked out database in one environment, and then my next environment, when I move it up closer to production, maybe even staging environment, I could have a live database. I'm going to run the same exact test. There's a lot of redundancy in testing that we have to be careful there. We want to minimize waste, but you're not going to cut all redundancy, even though it may seem to somebody outside of testing that running the same test again and again and again, changing only one parameter, like running the test again and again and only changing the data, or running the test again and then running it again on a different environment, or running the test once and then when we get a new build, running it again. There's a redundancy in testing, and that's not waste. So we have to be careful about minimizing. The conversation I just had about the regression suite, that this regression suite had become this big monster and it's so difficult to maintain, and now the company looks at it like there's a lot of waste. I'm all for cutting waste, but part of that is, wait a minute, you have to remember that at some level, testing is a redundant process, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing that I run the test once, it passes or fails, whatever. When I move it to the next environment, I get a new piece of information. I get a new piece of learning. In a way that I'm really amplifying learning by saying, when we made, the only thing that changed is going from this one environment to this next environment. There weren't any code changes, and the test had this result, whether it passed or failed, right? Cutting waste doesn't mean our testing process shrinks down to running tests once and then we're done. It's testing is at its foundation a somewhat redundant process, and that is also amplified learning. At the same time, to balance against this is you need a lot of automation, Anything that can be automated, what's worth automating, automate it. Mundane and repetitive tasks that you're currently running manually are a waste. If they're mundane tests, if they're repetitive, automate them. Now, I'm not an automate everything guy. I'm not a person who just says, if a test is worth running, it's worth automating. I don't believe that. I could be running a whole bunch of tests during development, and I'm just going to make up a number. I could be running 50 tests on a certain feature with a bunch of different pieces of data on a bunch of different mobile devices, a couple of different browsers, in a couple of different workflows, but I'm still testing the same feature. I might wind up running 50 tests. That doesn't mean I need to automate all 50 of those tests that are going to wind up being either part of my regression, or that every time I get a new build of that product, I'm going to run all 50 of those tests. Of those 50, where I'm just learning, how does this thing work, right? I'm running a bunch of tests to learn, how does this thing work under this condition? How does it work under that condition? How does it work under this, with this piece of data? How does it work with that piece of data? I'm just going to make up a number. I might only wind up automating 10 of those tests. 50 of them are really good learning exercises. 50 of them, I got pieces of information about how the application works. That doesn't mean I have to automate all 50. So, modern development needs a high level of automation, but it has to be intelligent automation. It's when I say what testing can be automated, what is worth automating, automate that stuff. It doesn't mean automate everything. It means automate the tests that are really going to be valuable for you. The tests that are mundane, they need to be run, but they're kind of boring, and they could be run manually. Even if, important and boring don't contradict each other, right? I could have important tests that are kind of boring to run, automate them. Tests that are repetitive, automate them. But it doesn't mean you're going to automate every single test. So we're balancing here, testing being a repetitive process, testing is amplified learning, but you have to automate a lot. So with this goal of looking for ways, so on the slide before this, 2 slides before this, I said, focus on what's important, focus on what's the most important, focus on where you're going to learn the most. We just have to make sure we're doing smart testing, and that our testing is going to give smart results we can make judgments about these results, that things work or things don't work, or things need to be tweaked or they're okay as they are. Look for waste in our testing and just make sure we're doing the smartest testing possible, and we're automating the smartest tests. Another waste that I brought up earlier was this idea of waiting or handoff and multitasking. They are considered wastes in lean software development. So let's take a step back from that for a minute. Scrum introduced this idea of cross-functional teams, that we can't have like a UI designer designing the UI while the other people on the dev team wait for the UI designer to be done. Then once the UI is designed, then the developers are going to go and write their code, write their functions, and then hook them into the UI. And they're waiting. They're like the testers or maybe the database people are waiting for that code to be handed off to them, so that then they can go and make the database changes they need to make. This idea of cross-functional teams is, instead of doing handoff and instead of waiting, have multiple skills. So maybe the person who designs the UI is also the person who's going to test it. The developer is also a DBA, and when after the code is developed, then they're going to go and make the database changes. You have to have multiple functions on the team, so that there's not a constraint between one team has to wait for handoff from another team to start working. That handoff and waiting is really a waste. Which led to a lot of companies having hybrid developers, where the constraint of developers doing their thing and the testers waiting to get products to test. When they get it from the developers, by the time they get it from the developers, there's been a bunch of waiting, and what the heck are testers going to do while they're waiting for code? They're going to write a bunch of tests, or document a bunch of details on test cases, which we know from just-in-time test development, by the time we get the code, it's not built the way we thought it was going to be built. So a bunch of the test cases that we just wrote have waste in them. That a bunch of companies are moving toward this idea of hybrid developers, like it or not, or that the developers just take over a bunch of the testing tasks. Wherever you are in this spectrum of having cross-functional teams or hybrid teams, that's the subject of another webinar. It comes from this lean idea, this idea that even before lean was used in the guys who invented Scrum, Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber, about having cross-functional teams, is cutting down waiting, cutting down handoff, and cutting down multitasking. Those are considered wastes. So we really want to cut down on waiting and handoff. My head is flooding with examples of teams just multitasking, handing off from one silo to another. I've used that word silo a couple of times in this webinar already when I was talking about quality at every step, where there were silos of teams handing off to each other, expecting this siloed group at the end of testers to test at the end and find bugs. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work like that, right? So waiting and handoff is one of the primary places that people will look for waste in lean to cut. All right. Another idea of waste is some people say in lean, if it doesn't go to the customer, it's overhead. If it doesn't go to the customer, it's waste. Like a design doc, like a test plan. If a test plan doesn't go to the customer, it's a waste. Like test cases. If your test cases don't go to a customer, then it's a waste. Don't document them. If it's not intended for the customer, it's a waste. So that rattles a whole bunch of teams. I'll tell you even another one, bug reports. But if bug reports don't go to the customer, it's overhead. It's waste. It's management. And bugs and test cases and test plans are often considered waste in lean software development. It's a byproduct of the software development process. It's not a product that goes to customers. So stop with bug reports, stop with test cases, and stop with test plans. Wow, that's earth-shattering to many teams. So when I said lean gives you a bunch of hard choices, and looking for waste is not going to be a fun and easy thing. We're going to talk in a few minutes about how do we handle bugs or test cases or test plans. But this lean idea that if you're doing lean, people can bring this up to you, or if you're trying to get more lean, you will see this, that if it doesn't go to the customer, it's overhead and it's a waste. Some waste, I say waste here, something that's repetitive or some things that get documented are necessary. We just want to minimize. You want to minimize waste. Sometimes people have taken this lean idea of waste to an extreme, that like all documentation is overhead and all documentation is bad. And I think that's too much. I want to jump for a second out of talking about software to talk about milk, right? When you have milk, you have whole milk and whole milk depending on the cow. You have like 4%, milk has about 4% milk fat, or like 3.7% milk fat. You have low-fat milk, you have skim milk, you have non-fat milk, right? There's all these different levels of milk, right? Some people think that to be lean, you go from whole milk to non-fat, right? In my coffee, I put half and half, which is like really fat. To be lean doesn't mean I have to go to non-fat milk. It doesn't mean you have to stop and go to zero. When I say that a wrong idea of lean is going from what we do now to zero documentation is a wrong idea. Lean means cut waste and cut excess documentation. So if I put whole milk in my coffee and I switch to low-fat milk, I've already cut my fat in half, right? So it's leaner. Now the milk that I put in my coffee is leaner. I've cut it in half, which is great. It's gonna, I guess, I like my half and half in coffee, so this is a metaphor. So when we cut documentation and we're cutting waste, it doesn't mean go to zero. So your team may really rely on bug reports, and bug reports, when people enter a call in with like support issues, they get entered into the bug database, or sometimes bugs go away and then they come back, and people rely on older bug reports and having this database of how the product works or how the product was fixed when we had a bug. I don't want to get into the politics of a bug tracking system right now, and bug tracking systems have really become political these days. But the idea that you go from, you have this database of thousands of test cases, all of a sudden somebody says all documentation is a waste. That's not what lean is about. Lean is about cut waste, be leaner. It doesn't mean go to 0%. So this is another one of those hard choices where how much do you cut back on what goes in a bug database? We don't want a bug database to be big and fat and a pain in the neck and difficult to manage and slow. We want bug databases to be really efficient and help our development system, not slow it down. We want our test cases to be to be more efficient and help our help our testing process not to be a pain in the neck, high maintenance, and slow us down. So the idea here is to be as efficient as possible, cut as much waste as we can without, you don't have to go to 0% documentation. All right. So moving past that, because we're going to keep focusing a little bit on documentation, since that's a big issue for test teams, but we had to lay out this idea that it doesn't mean that you totally stop. You just have to make choices there. All right, deliver as fast as possible. So this other lean idea that I want to go deeper into. Most people think that deliver as fast as possible is about external customers. And I use that example when I talked about that lean principle of deliver as fast as possible, is get it into the hands of the customer as fast as you can. This lean startup idea of minimum releasable functionality or minimum viable product, get it into the customer's hands as fast as you can, just so you can get feedback and find out if the customers like it or if the customers want to use it. But I want to take that idea of deliver as fast as possible into the testing team. And I brought up this example before. I know a whole lot of teams that have these big, giant automated regression suites that take either an overnight to run or days to run. Well, if part of CD, part of continuous delivery, is doing multiple builds a day, right? Even in continuous integration, there are some companies where a dev checks in a chunk of code that they wrote and they pull another build. Well, if you have a smoke test, you have a build process that takes overnight, that's not getting immediate results. That's not deliver as fast as possible. When somebody checks in a piece of code, that build has to be delivered as fast as possible. And if my automated regression suite is slowing them down, if it's going to take days for me to run an automated regression suite to say, yeah, the chunk of code that you just checked in, it didn't break other things, it still works. If it's going to take days to give feedback to the dev that wrote that, there's waste there, there's multitasking there, there's handoff, there's all kinds of these bad things, bad waste that we've talked about in lean. So what would happen if I'm a dev and I write a chunk of code and I check it into my source control and I want to find out if it works, if it broke anything? I could pull a local build. That's what some people are kind of hedging this by, like pulling a local build, and maybe I could pull something just of my immediate functional area. But if I want to see that this chunk of code that I just checked in is going to break another part of the system or this other part of the platform on a complicated system that we're developing, I need to be able to give immediate feedback. And if I can't, let's say we do an overnight build, by the next day, this dev is already working on another chunk of code. They've already picked up their next user story. They're working on another functional area. And if I find a bug, I go back to them the next day and I say, hey, that code you worked on, code you just checked into the system, broke this other feature. Then that dev has to stop working on what she's working on and start thinking, okay, wait a minute, that other user story that I just did, okay, I did this, I did that. They have to remember what they did yesterday. Now we get into these ideas of multitasking and task switching. There's handoff and waste, and this is how that giving immediate feedback is a key part of this lean software development. And it's not to external customers, it's to internal customers. We need our automation suites to give really fast results, to be easy to analyze, easy to understand, easy to communicate, where a dev checks in a chunk of code, we can get a build, and we can run a bunch of tests to say, well, against the tests that we ran, it's consistent with what we did yesterday. We don't think it broke anything. So many organizations that are trying to do continuous delivery do multiple builds a day, right? 2 builds in the morning, 2 builds in the afternoon. You have to design tests that are going to give your internal customers immediate feedback. So designing new automated suites, what tests are you going to run? Are you only going to run your smoke test, which is, we should spend a whole session talking about smoke tests and full regression suites for teams that have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of automated tests. It takes too long to run every test against every build. So how are we going to change the smoke test? Or are we only going to run a really small, limited set of tests to qualify a build? And when we are doing this continuous delivery process, the team is going to have to understand the risk of, we don't have time to do the overnight regression, or we don't have time to do the 5-day, run the 5 days of automated tests against every build. We might run them in the background or come up with some hedge against how we can still get these tests run, but we've got to get immediate feedback on the build. And for a lot of teams, this means redesigning what tests get run against every build. Okay, so deliver as fast as possible to internal customers. Amplify learning. I brought up this idea of amplify learning when I was talking about the main principles of Lean. Lean is finding bugs. Lean is about learning about the product, learning about the customers, learning about the environments, learning about the users. Also, emerging features is Lean. The idea that you are going to get a user story that is full and complete. I know a lot of teams are using this idea of definition of ready, that before they will take in a user story to be worked on, it has to be ready. It has to meet a definition of ready. Well, in Lean thinking, features emerge. You do something and then learn about it, run a bunch of tests against it to see how it works. Then you can tweak the feature, then tweak the feature, then tweak the feature, learning more and learning more and learning more and learning more each time. So emerging features is a Lean idea. It's not as much a concrete, it's ready or it's not ready. This user story is ready or not ready to be estimated and to come into the process. Most companies I know that do Lean have, instead of having big chunks of, I'm motioning here with my arms, big, like, we're not going to do 10 or 12 user stories in a sprint. We're managing the work in process to be small and skinny, one user story at a time, focused on one user story at a time, work on that one user story 100%, get it 100% done, and then pull another user story from the backlog and work on that user story 100% focused on that one user story, and do that user story from start to finish, and finish that work in progress and then pull another. If we were having a whole more than an hour to talk about Lean, there are a couple of words that I use, like Lean being a pull system, and I said the idea of a value mapping, value stream mapping. There are other ideas in Lean that are kind of bigger than we can get into in an hour, but Lean is emergent features. We start writing code, learn about it, tweak it to how we can deliver value to the customer and get it done. But Lean is learning. You learn something, testing evolves. You learn something and the plan changes. Don't overly plan early. This is one of the reasons why people who do Lean have moved away from big, heavy test plans at the beginning to the plan for how we're going to test emerges as we see the feature. You have intelligent people and you empower the team. You have intelligent people empowered to develop ideas for testing just in time. That's throwing around a whole lot of these Lean principles, but instead of writing a big upfront test plan, which I'm not against writing some kind of test plan in the beginning of a process, but the details of testing, the low-level plans for testing are going to emerge. So don't overly plan early. Amplify learning is exploratory testing. Amplify learning is finding bugs, performance profiling, developing use cases, developing test cases. Amplify learning testing is all about amplifying learning, right? And it's a key ingredient to how Lean works, right? We don't do a whole lot of upfront planning and define the whole process. Then a piece of code gets, installed on a certain environment, and then we go and blindly execute a whole bunch of pre-planned tests. That's not how Lean works. Lean evolves, and the testing is a learning process. All right, and The last lean principle that I want to go into big detail on is quality at every step. It's a natural idea to focus on. Lean culturally, just like Agile, just like Scrum, just like all modern development processes, has turned traditional development on its head by who owns quality, right? Everyone owns quality. The answer to who owns quality is everyone owns quality. There can't be one hero who is going to, test like crazy the day before release and, miraculously find all these bugs and expect to deliver a quality product. There has to be quality user stories. There have to be quality code, quality unit tests. You can't have, a quality product based on useless unit tests, right? Unit tests have to be good. They have to be meaningful. They have to do something. I know some people have coverage metrics that they have to hit code coverage based on at the unit test level, and the unit test might not be really efficient or effective unit tests to find bugs or to show that to show how a feature works. It's just a unit test to, for example, just to call a certain feature, that the feature gets called. If you have a code coverage tool, would show that line of code is covered, but it didn't really do anything. It didn't find you. It didn't give you any learning. It didn't give you a piece of information that's going to help you release a more quality product. You have to have good unit tests. You need quality environments. You need quality test cases, quality automation, quality bug reports, quality plans for your testing. There's quality at every step. You can't just add quality at the end. And I think that most companies that I go to these days have moved away from thinking that some QA team or some test team are the gatekeepers of quality. I think most companies have moved away from that and know that quality at every step is the only way that you can get a decent product to your customers. I think some companies still struggle with this, though. I think some companies still have too heavy a reliance on testers to save us at the end. And if you're one of those companies, that idea really has to go. Okay, so quality at every step. Quality begins with good user stories. You're never going to wind up with a quality product unless you have good user stories at the same time. All the way down, you need quality bug reports, right? If you don't have a great bug report, your bug report might describe the wrong bug or not be specific enough to fix, or your bug reports have to be good quality. A couple of other things about quality at every step, that there's no QA silo or team responsible for saving quality. I just said the whole team owns quality. Everybody has a piece in quality, and everybody tests. Release management tests, build engineering tests, IT and ops tests, developers test, and testers test, right? There's no gatekeeper. There's no one gatekeeper to quality, right? If your developers aren't doing unit testing, a significant unit testing, you're not going to wind up with a quality product. So everybody tests. We need quality at every step. But also quality at every step has a more specific meaning in continuous delivery. So quality at every step in continuous delivery is you do something. I talked about earlier, this pull system where we're going to pull one user story and focus on it and work on it 100%. In addition to that, in CD, you do one thing, you do one small thing, you test it, see if it worked. I take this one chunk of code, I move it to another environment, test it. I see the results of what happened when I was at that environment. Maybe I move something from a dev environment to a test environment, run a bunch of tests. I take something from the test environment and I move it to where I had some dummy databases or some small databases to get testing done faster. When I move it to the next environment, we have a full database, test it every step to make sure that, I'm not going to move to a staging environment late in the development process, pre-production environment later in the process to find out that a bunch of things broke because I wasn't testing them all along. It's from environments, testing at every step. Each piece in the development process, test at every step. Each little thing you do, you roll in one chunk of code, test it. Even if it's rerun the unit test, rerun your smoke test, everything you do, test it. So also thinking in terms of this idea that every once in a while I'll go to a customer and they will do this big block of testing at the end. They get the idea that quality begins with user stories, and they focus on the quality of user stories and the quality of environments, right? You have these definitions of ready and things to get the user stories in better shape, but still reliant on a big block of testing to happening at the big block of testing that happens at the end. If you hope that running this whole big automated regression suite, or waiting until you get this integrated product and then throwing a bunch of manual testing at it at the end of the process is a good idea, that's got to go. Quality at every step means testing at every step. Running your automated suites, even doing manual testing, focus on whatever kinds of testing activities you have at every step, test at every step. So now that we understand these, and I've taken them from being general software development principles, trying to pull them down to testing principles for the team, I want to go a little bit deeper in them, specifically on quality and testing, and a couple of culture things. So the Poppendicks have this idea that they published this idea that the best way to establish reliable and predictable delivery is to establish reliable, predictable workflows. This includes testing as part of a definition of done, and zero technical debt. So I haven't mentioned technical debt thus far. Lean considers technical debt a waste. There's no technical debt allowed in Lean, and this is actually a deal breaker for some companies who are trying to adopt more Lean practices, of saying, okay, this is the minimum viable function we're going to get out. We're going to release this, but it's got a bunch of things we're going to go and fix later. Some companies hedge on this Lean idea that when you do one thing, you take this one thing that you're going to do and you do it 100%. You do it 100%. There's no defects. There's no technical debt. You just fix this. You're not fix, but you do this function 100%, and you release this function, and it works. And you're not going to have to go back and rework it or fix it or refactor it, because all those things are considered waste in Lean. So zero technical debt. And there's no such thing as a best practice. You have to keep getting better. One thing about testing, this great school of context-driven testing, that testing, how are we going to test something? Well, it depends. It depends on the customers. It depends on the environments. There's no just one set of best practices that we should do all the time. One, it depends on the context of the release. It depends on the context that the product is going to go out, what the better practices are going to be for testing. And also, we have to keep getting better, this continuous improvement. Offshoots of Lean, like CPI, continuous process improvement, keep getting better. Examine your processes. We can't say this is the best practice guide and this is how we're going to. These are the practices we're going to do as particularly us, a test team, all the time. We have to keep getting better, and our changing practice, our testing practices are going to change depending on the context of what we're developing, how we're developing it, where we are, and where our customers are. So Lean doesn't focus on best practices. Our practices are going to evolve, and they're going to keep getting better. And this idea of zero defects. This is another leap for many companies where they decide, maybe Lean isn't for us. That if you expect to find defects either in the end, in your final verification phase, it shows that your development process is broken. If you are tolerating defects out in production and then you're going to go and fix them later, it's waste. Refactoring is a waste. We've talked about those things a couple of times. There's zero tolerance for defects in Lean. Whatever functionality you're going to release has to be 100% done, and it works as best you can, right? Every once in a while, customers do things that you might not expect, or environments change, right? But if you are releasing something with known defects, that's not Lean. All right. Lean and automation strategy. I brought this idea of automation up a couple of times. Review your automation strategy to make sure it's as efficient as it can be at every level. Efficient unit test automation, efficient service level, API level automation, efficient UI automation. We have to deliver our automated feedback as fast as we can, and automate as much as makes sense. I've talked about this automation strategy enough, but to bring up this idea that you have to have an automation strategy, right? Not all of our automation happens through a UI anymore. And we just have to make sure that it's lean and efficient and gives good results that can be evaluated fast. All right. Specific to DevOps, small releases showing consistency, automate as much as reasonable. I've talked about a couple of these. I'm trying to pull through a little bit faster so that we can have time for some questions. So to summarize this, understanding lean and lean software development, eliminate waste, decide as late as possible, just-in-time decision making, deliver as fast as possible, quality at every step, amplify learning, empower the team, and see the whole. I would hope that if nothing else, by the end of this session, you fully understand what lean is about and how it is in software. I want to talk about a couple of first steps that you can take in your mainly in your testing practice, but in software development. Look for waste. Examine your documentation. Right? I've talked a few times about test plans and test cases and bug reports. Examine your documentation where you can cut waste. Testing is amplified learning. Testing is important. Testing happens the whole time through. It's a new attitude about testing that testing is learning. Build a culture of quality at every step, and re-examine your automation strategy to make sure that it's as efficient as it can possibly be. And we talked about this documentation thing. I want to read this one quote at the bottom of this slide on documentation from the Poppendix. Predictable organizations do not guess about the future and call it a plan, like write a big test plan. They develop a capacity to learn quickly, right? So you have empowered teams who are smart so that they can respond to the future as it unfolds. So this idea that you would have this big defined test plan up front is not really a lean idea. So examine your documentation and management and overhead, right? Be careful about, I didn't talk too much about measurement in here, but we have to measure something in lean, but be careful about over measuring and dashboards. And remember, in Scrum, the idea of measurement, the only measurement we do is burn down and velocity. There's no dashboards of bugs found and bugs fixed and all kinds of support calls and numbers of support calls. There's no dashboards. Dashboards are overhead, and dashboards is waste. And remember the Agile principle, working software is the best measurement of progress. It's not a dashboard with 20 measurements on it. So another place to examine first steps is cutting how much you measure and making sure that you're measuring the most important things and you're measuring the minimum that you need to. All right, so I'm repeating myself a little bit here in the summary about focusing on just-in-time. So I'm going to stop now and give us a couple of minutes for questions, if anybody has some questions to ask.
Hey, Michael.
Hi, Jimmy.
Yeah, we'll take a question here that says, if you are doing decide as late as possible, JIT, how do you know you are not too late?
So that's a very good question, and there's a balance there. I've seen a phrase that people use, decide at the latest responsible time. Decide at the latest responsible time. So you could work on, I said the word platform, maybe you work on a big complicated system. You can't have every individual team doing just-in-time design because they're gonna break each other's stuff and it's not gonna work together. So maybe the last responsible time is there's XP, Extreme Programming, Kent Beck's Extreme Programming talks about having a design metaphor. So maybe we make a simple design and have a design metaphor earlier before people start coding, but it's not a detailed design. We're doing just enough design that at that moment people can start doing what they need to do, but we're designing at the last responsible time. So if I take this down to the testing perspective, I might be involved. I'm a tester, and I might be involved in user stories. I might be involved in the sizing of it, and I might be thinking about testing. I probably can't go blindly into getting code and thinking, okay, I'm going to do 100% exploratory testing, and I'm just going to blindly go in and test like crazy and think that I can find every bug. That's probably not responsible. If I'm a smart tester and I know how to test, and I know sometimes I need some white box information, or I need to know how a certain environment is going to handle something, or how this browser is different than that browser, I may need to design some tests before I get the code, and not leave it to the instant that I just get the code live. Think of just in time as you're deferring a decision to the last responsible moment. It doesn't mean the actual moment that you're going to start hitting a keyboard. The last responsible moment could be weeks before. You need to design a bunch of tests and maybe you may need to get buy-in from a product owner to say, I don't fully understand how the customer works. I think the customer does this. I think the customer's workflow is this, and I'm going to design a bunch of these tests weeks before you ever get product. So that's a really good question about just-in-time. Just-in-time is the blanket statement from Lean, but it might be more effective, it might be more realistic for you to say the last responsible moment where you can responsibly execute your job. That's it, Jim.
Perfect. We got one. We'll get one more. What type of test automation do you recommend? Does test generation fit into Lean?
What is that? What type of test automation fits into Lean, or is it what type of test generation fits into Lean?
So what type of test automation do you recommend, and does test generation fit into Lean?
What type of test automation? Do I need a full hour to talk about this? I actually have a session in your conference coming up in the fall on this. Here's what I would say to answer quickly. You have to have an automation strategy. I brought up that idea of, you have to balance unit tests and service level and UI tests that are efficient and effective at that moment. At that time, when you're moving from like a dummy database to a live database, you need automated tests to do that, right? You have to have automated tests, but you need a strategy for what are the specific small amount of tests that we're going to run right here in this environment to show that when we move from the dummy database to the live database, that works, or how it's going to work. Are the automated tests we're going to run going to give us information? Can we learn enough from just these couple of automated tests to say, okay, here's the information I have, and I can make an evaluation on it? So you need an automation strategy, which really surprisingly, when I go to customers in my consulting work, I find a lot of people, they'll buy a tool and they'll say, okay, well, we're going to automate without having a big automation strategy. You need an automation strategy. So I'm a huge believer in test automation. And the test generation, I think I'd actually need to know more about their question to know what the question is about test generation, whether it's automatic test generation. I'm not sure what they mean by that, but you have to have an automation strategy.
Okay, perfect. We'll have him reach out to you.
Good.
All right, perfect. And that's it. We thank you. That's all we have for questions, but thanks, Michael. I appreciate it. We really love having you. I can't wait to see you in Boston, only a few weeks away.
Thank you.
Again, join us in Boston. It's in 2 weeks. It's going to be September 23rd to the 26th. Go ahead and register. Our next community webinar is 5 things to consider when implementing a mobile device. That's with Steve Orlando, and it's going to be Wednesday, October 9th. So thank you very much. I appreciate everyone. Again, thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
We will see you all in Boston.
Have
a great day.
Thank you.